afternoon. This is David M. Olsen with Calc Journal, and we have Patrick Moser. And a quick bio on Patrick. He is a professor of writing and French at Drury University. He's the author of Surf and Rescue, George Freeth and the Birth of California Beach Culture, and the editor of Pacific Passages, an anthology of surf writing. Is there anything else we should add to the bio there? You up to anything?
I think that's pretty well updated, except, of course, for the new book.
Yeah, right. So, and that's why we're chatting today. We have a beautiful new book. I have an advanced reading copy here. We'll kind of show that to the camera, but it is called Waikiki Dreams, How California Appropriated Hawaiian Beach Culture by Patrick Moser. And I will, I'm going to read just one of the little quotes that we have right here by Dina, and then we'll dive into some questions. But Dina Gilio Whitaker says Moser challenges conventional surf historiography in ways that are desperately needed. Mainstream surf narratives frequently point out the influence of Native Hawaiian culture on California surf culture, but typically without critical analysis. Moser upends these narratives by bringing in indigenous scholarly perspectives to explain the dynamics of cultural appropriation in a refreshingly updated approach. So let's just kind of start at the beginning with this project. You know, this seems like there was a book that you did previous that was almost like a natural segue to this piece here. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what brought this book on and created that, got this creation going for you?
All right. Well, thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to chat with you about all things surf. Originally, I thought there wasn't much research that had been done about this period before Gidget. So from the time that George Freeth arrived Southern California in 1907 up to Gidget, there's a little bit of material in some of the histories out there.
What year was Gidget, just for the record here?
So the novel was published in 1957, and then the movie comes out in 1959. So basically the first half century of surfing and California beach culture had not been looked at in much depth. So I thought, well, there's a niche for me. And I started with George Freeth, and I just wanted to write his biography. And then as I started to do the research, I realized that there was a history there that had yet to be written. And that was, the beginning of California beach culture as we recognize it today. So pretty quickly, I discovered as I was writing the Freeth biography that I probably had 3 books worth of material as I was doing research. So all 3 books were circulating in my mind as I was going to these archives in California, to surf museums, to libraries, and also in Honolulu. I thought there's a lot of material here and I could probably get 3 books. So I finished with the second one, which picks up where George Freeth left off. He died in 1919. So this covers surfing, California beach culture from 1920 and goes all the way through World War II. And then the third book that I'm starting to research right now will go from post-World War II up to Gidget.
Oh, awesome. And can you tell us a little? So, I'm just curious about your fascination with California beach culture. Where does that stem from? And the impetus behind starting this project in the beginning.
So, California beach culture in particular, as I said, I just started with a biography of Freeth, and it turned into a history of California beach culture. But I've lived in the state of Missouri for the past 25 years. Mm-hmm. So I was born and raised in California, educated there, and then got my PhD. And then a job came up for my wife, who also had a PhD in English literature. And she got a job offer in Springfield, Missouri, and we had never been here. Our son was almost 3 years old at the time. This is back in 1997. And so I said, okay, I'll follow you out. I didn't have a job. I just finished my own PhD in French literature. And so we moved here in 1997. And I think several years after that, I started an honors course on the history and culture of surfing. And I think living in the Midwest, being so far away from the coast, it was my vicarious connection to California and surfing.
So, I mean, you grew up in California and kind of were surrounded by it. So is it just always stuck with you, the California beach lifestyle or culture?
It has. Yeah, I was born in Santa Monica, and then we moved up to north of San Francisco when I was 11. So when I was a kid, we used to go out to Zuma Beach. My dad was a diver and had tried surfing out of Malibu. And then I basically started learning how to surf up in Northern California when I was 14 out at Salmon Creek Beach in Bodega Bay. So that's my home turf, I guess.
Bodega Bay.
Right. So that was, and then when I was 17, I moved back down to West Los Angeles. I lived in Hermosa Beach for several years. And those were really formative times for me when I was surfing every day or multiple times a day. I was working out at the Redondo Beach Pier, just working as a busboy. And so those 2 or 3 years were really formative. And then when I moved out of Los Angeles and continued my education at UC Berkeley and UC Davis, it stuck with me. And as a grad student at UC Davis, I proposed this course on the history and culture of surfing for the experimental college. And that was really the first time when I started to do some research and some teaching.
Yeah, so it's kind of been it's been a passion of yours since you were.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just, how it is. I've always lived by the coast within either walking distance or 15, 20-minute drive. And you know how it goes. It stays with you. I miss the ocean a lot living here. And it's just something that I really miss. And so writing about it and getting a chance to do research and surf in the summertime is terrific for me.
That's what I was going to go to next. So, there was a significant amount of research that you did. And you said you visited a lot of museums. So, did you come back to California to do some of this research? What did that look like?
Exactly. So I would go out to California and go I just wanted to see what was available, because as I first started to do research on surfing, this was back in probably 2000, I had proposed my first course, which is the history and culture of surfing, and there were no textbooks. So I started to do research in the summer. It was in California, where I would go to Honolulu and just go to the Bishop Museum. I would go to the Hawaii State Archives, anywhere just to find out who had written what about surfing. And over the course of 6 or 7 years, I collected all this material, and that became the anthology Pacific Passages. So I used that as my course textbook. And I decided to do something similar for the history of California surfing. I went to the surfing museum in Oceanside. I would go to the International Surfing Museum in Huntington Beach. I would go to the Huntington Museum in San Marino. I would raid, the photographic collections of the Los Angeles Public Library, anywhere that I could track down information. I would read all the books I could. I paid for a subscription to newspapers.com and, did a deep dive in there. So I just wanted to find out what had been written about surfing and see if I could track as much information down as I could. And then I could visit family in California in the summertime. I could go surfing and do all that great coastal stuff.
Have you done any Great Lake surfing?
I have, there was a conference, actually AWP, the Association of Writing Professions, was up in Chicago one year. And I had a friend who was a writer, and she wanted to write about, she wanted me to give her surf lessons so she could write about it. And so I went up to Chicago, and we took a day and drove out of Chicago and went around the Lake Michigan into Michigan and found a place, it's called Third Coast Surf Shop, and they rented surfboards.
Nice.
And I found a dive shop that rented wetsuits, and this was in February, so it was the middle of winter.
Little
And
cold.
we went surfing.
Yeah, yeah. Did you? What I mean, so in winter, does it have to be pretty windy to get some swell off that?
Exactly. Yeah, they need that big fetch. So you have to wait for the wind to come up. And that whole experience was wild because it has a whole different rhythm than ocean surfing. You know, they're not ground swells, it's all wind swell. So the swells come fast and furious.
Mhm.
So that makes you go fast and furious because it's only around for a few hours. And then, of course, it's freshwater surfing, which is just really strange.
Yeah, yeah. I've never done it. I see these pictures of guys in like Lake Michigan with icicles hanging out of their beards and stuff, and I'm like, man, it's something to try, but I mean, it must be a totally different animal, you know.
Yeah, it really is. But it was fun. We had a good time.
So one of the things I wanted to point out was there's all these beautiful pictures in here. Um, you know, can you let's talk about this book a little bit. I'm going to read the introduction. You have a quote here in the introduction. We had ukes and guitars, and one fella had a trumpet, and we used to have big luau's. After we'd surf, we'd go back to the beach and just eat. Then we'd play Hawaiian songs till midnight or so, just Hawaiian music because that's all we liked. We used to listen to this radio program called Hawaii Calls, and it broadcast out of Waikiki. And we'd all dream about going to Hawaii. Calvin Tooley Clark, Palos Verdes Surfing Club. So maybe you can tell us just, you know, a little bit about maybe some key takeaways that you discovered kind of while you were writing this book, and some of the, maybe a little bit about maybe one or two of the characters that you follow throughout this work.
Right. Well, it's a great question because one of the reasons that I enjoyed writing so much, you know, these books is because there's such great characters and they got great stories. And I wanted to know more about them, and I wanted to share their stories with as many people as possible. So Tooley Clark is one of them. Pete Peterson, obviously, the whole gang from the Palos Verdes Surfing Club, and Marianne Hawkins, they all knew each other really well. And for me, one of the takeaways of the book is how influential Native Hawaiian culture was, you know, from beginning in the 1920s and the 1930s. I mean, most surfers know how influential Native Hawaiian culture is. It's basically the whole foundation, California beach culture. But just the influence of Duke, for example, throughout the 1920s. And then in that quotation you read, Hawaii Calls, that radio program that started in 1935, broadcast live from Waikiki. So you have these surfers in California. Tooley Clark was part of the Palos Verdes Surfing Club, of course. And Bluff Cove down at Palos Verdes mostly breaks in the wintertime. It breaks best on a west swell. So it was cold water surfing. And all these guys are listening to this radio broadcast from Waikiki. That radio show was a half hour long, and it started in November of 1935. So they'd be down at the beach, and it's cold water in the wintertime. There's no wetsuits, of course. If you've been down to Bluff Cove, it's just rocks. So it's not like Waikiki at all. And yet Bob Ball had called Bluff Cove Little Waikiki. So they were so stoked about surfing, and they all wanted to go to Waikiki, and some of them had gone because, of course, it's exotic to them. It's warm water year round. You have the palm trees, you have the hula dancers, and there was this dream of living a life like the Waikiki Beach Boys. So again, that's the big influence of Native Hawaiian cultures. The Waikiki Beach Boys were really the epitome of what these California surfers wanted to be and wanted to imitate. And they wanted it so badly that they just imagined they were Waikiki out there surfing at Bluff Cove in the wintertime, freezing. You know, they would light these old tires on fire down at the beach. And that's, you know, they'd go out and surf for an hour and then run in and warm up and go back out and surf. So they were pretty hardy. And but Waikiki was really at the top of their list for places to go and things to do. And so they dressed like, the Waikiki Beach Boys. They had, hula parties, everything that they could think of to do, they tried to do. They mixed in Hawaiian language as much as they knew. They all idolized Duke Kahanamoku, who had lived in Los Angeles throughout the 1920s. So Duke was really their touchstone for the whole surfing culture.
Kind of reminds me to this day. So there's a surf writer named Chaz Smith. Are you familiar with his work? And he calls it the semi-ironic shaka, which I think is the funniest way to say it, because surfers to this day, right, they'll still use the shaka, which is like, I think, an example this day of that, that nod to Hawaiian culture. But none of the people, most of the people that are doing it are not native. They're appropriating this native device. And so that's why it's semi-ironic, because it's not something that is inherent to the culture here in California, but it's something that's been widely spread throughout it. But
yeah, and that appropriation began very early on, in the 1930s, and it gets us into this point of, when does appreciation for another culture become appropriation? And that's a really fine line. That's a hard line to define sometimes. I ran into Tom Pohaku Stone at the in Orange County. I was down at the Surfing Heritage and Culture Center, and we were checking out the boards. And he said, "Yeah, the culture was appropriated, but it was also given. Hawaiians gave their culture away." So for me, one of the questions about when does it become appropriation is, am I profiting off of this culture? Do I understand the traditions that the shaka or that these cultural practices, do I understand the tradition of where it comes from? Do I understand what it means to Native Hawaiians? And am I giving anything back? Am I helping to support those traditions at all? Those are some of the questions that I always ask myself.
And those are some of the questions that you kind of work through in this work as well. So, I mean, it's a fascinating book. I think, even outside of an academic setting, I think this is a book that a lot of people will really enjoy, because they're going to enjoy the history, these characters, like you said, these characters that most people, even avid surfers, probably aren't familiar with, right? Like,
right.
And you just learn a lot about them. And this period in California, that's to your point, is there's not a lot of published research and on it. So I think it's an important work, and I think a lot of people will get a lot of enjoyment out of this piece. So do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Only that, I appreciate the kind words about the book, that I do hope people enjoy the stories that surround these characters, because I have a lot of admiration for them. And also the beaches, they're, the second half of the book is how much surfing is really based, in place. The place is so important to surfers. And so I really enjoyed learning a lot about San Onofre and Palos Verdes and Malibu. And it's a pleasure to be able to share that with other people.
Awesome. Cool. Anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye and go out? And, oh, sorry. When is the book? June 11th. So this comes out in pretty soon. What is that?
Yeah, I think they're already starting to ship copies out. I haven't gotten my own copy yet, so
you get the box soon.
It'll arrive. I think you got a copy before I did.
Yeah, they were good.
I think they're starting to ship it. So yeah, I hope people enjoy it. If you have any questions, you can look me up at Drury University. Shoot me an email. I'm always happy to chat.
Cool. All right. I'll let the people know. Appreciate your time, and thank you so much.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. You have a good day.